Hi, this is Jurgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis vlog. This video is about lie detection and why body language, microexpressions are not reliable tools to detect deception, and why linguistic analysis and statement analysis are also not reliable tools to read deception. Most people seem to think that they can read whether someone is deceptive or not by observing their body language or by analyzing their speech. And the scientific research on the topic seems quite conclusive that this is not really the case at all. So, for example, um, internationally or around the world, when people are asked, how do you know when someone's lying to you? What do you think is the best indicator? The most typical answer is gaze aversion. The person wouldn't look me in the eye, or the person was constantly looking away. But the research shows very clearly that this cue is completely useless to infer whether someone is being deceptive or telling the truth. And the same goes for all sorts of other so-called body language cues. There's no body language cue that in any reliable way can show you whether someone is being honest with you or is telling you the truth. Here's something also interesting to notice, and that is that so when people are asked, how do you know someone's lying to you? What do you think is the most, the best indicator? They answer gaze aversion. But when people are asked, have you ever discovered being lied to, and how did you discover it? The research shows that most lies that are detected are not detected in real time. They are detected after the fact, sometimes hours or weeks or months after the fact, and they're usually detected by other evidence coming in, meaning the person might, check their bank statements and suddenly realize that, hey, wait a minute, my husband wasn't actually there. He was at that hotel instead because that's what the credit card statements show. These are the ways that people typically discover deception in real life, not based upon body language or linguistic cues, but based upon other evidence coming in after the fact that disconfirms the person's claims. Or, of course, knowing in advance that what the other person is saying is not in accordance, with the facts. Um, when people do good lie detection skills, it's usually in a context where they have a lot of knowledge. So they know something about what is plausible or not, and they have good critical thinking skills in that particular context, and they have access to relevant information and evidence, meaning that they can troubleshoot and check whether the claims actually uh, actually fit the available evidence. So this has, for example, been shown with the newer methods of police interrogation called the peace method, which was developed in the UK and Wales, which is being used in parts of the UK and Wales and Norway, New Zealand, Australia, parts of Canada. This method seems to work better to prevent false confessions and to also get more, truthful actual confessions. And in these sorts of interrogation, you let the person talk. It's not about trying to force a confession. It's about getting the person to talk and to reveal a lot of information that you then can check against the evidence you already have, or that you can then hopefully check whether actually maps onto other evidence or not. It's not based upon the old reading body language and doing statement analysis that interrogation techniques like the reid technique, for example, and all its derivatives were based upon, which had an unacceptably high rate of false confessions. Um, so why are body language cues so unreliable to detect deception and also statement analysis? Well, let's start with body language. Of course, we human beings are all natural profilers. You know, we watch each other's behaviors, we infer other people's emotional states and motives based upon how they're behaving, and that, you know, quite often works quite well. So it kind of makes sense that we can, you know, infer whether someone's being truthful or not based upon body language cues. Now, according to the detection researcher Timothy Levine, whose book Duped I highly recommend that you read if you're interested in this topic, um, he makes the point that we humans have a truth default going on, meaning that we tend to assume that most people are telling the truth most of the time. And that's just practical and functional because if you had to check everything that most people around you were saying most of the time, you couldn't really form relationships. You couldn't really get anything done. So it seems as if that default to truth in many of life's contexts, you know, work. And then we might get burned from time to time. As Spinoza said back in the day, you know, to understand, even to read something or to comprehend a sentence, you have to first believe it. You have to first take it on board, and then you might critically pick it apart later. So the human brain seems to be a belief engine, you know, just automatically believing things seems to be our default, and being skeptical and critical seems to require more effort. Now, as a result of this truth default, we trust each other more, we cooperate better, and we are more likely to spot when people are being honest. Now, we're less good at detecting when people are being dishonest. If you take all the various, you know, studies and you kind of lump them together, we seem to be just a little bit better than average, you know, around 54%. And that is because there are a few people who are really bad liars. Most people seem to be quite good liars, but there are a few people who are really bad liars. And these are the people who, you know, whenever they try to lie, you know, they blush or they begin to stutter or they get visibly nervous. You know, you can just spot that something's going on with them. And, you know, these are terrible lawyers. And pretty much everyone, you know, gets those rights. And as a result of that, we tend to score a little bit better than average. But there is no body language cue or set of cues that reliably points towards deception. And here's the trick. We tend to register or infer that someone's believable if their body language is kind of relaxed and they appear confident and friendly and their gestures are kind of symmetrical and their voice tone seems to match their physiology and they seem to be straightforward. Um, when people act that way, they come across as believable. When people don't act that way, when they seem to be anxious and awkward and they look away and they shift in their chair and you know they have these thought pauses and uh, they don't communicate to the point, they tend to register as less believable. But here's the crucial point. How authentic or believable someone comes across has virtually nothing to do with how honest or deceptive they actually are. I'll say that again because it's a crucial point. How authentic and honest and straightforward, meaning believable, someone comes across has virtually nothing to do with how honest or dishonest they actually are. This is this is the big problem. So once again, back to Timothy Levine. He did these studies with experienced police officers who had more than 10 to 15 years of actual experience, doing interrogation. And he would show people these videotapes, where people were being honest or deceptive. And Levine separates or creates these distinctions of people being matched or mismatched. So a person who's matched would be someone who is coming across as, relaxed and confident and pleasant and kind of symmetrical and that sort of stuff, and they're telling the truth, right? Um, but then you have and then you have, other people who come across as not believable, but they're actually telling the truth. And then you have other people who come across as believable, but they're lying through their teeth. Like a person like Bernie Madoff, for example. He was extremely good at coming across as believable, but the guy was a psychopath. He was lying through his teeth with no conscience whatsoever. And then you have people like Amanda Knox, who was innocently convicted and spent 4 years for a murder she didn't do in Italian prison. She was basically convicted for not behaving the way we would expect an innocent person to behave. So when police officers were shown video footage of people who were matched, so to speak, they got it right pretty much most of the time. But when people presented as awkward and anxious and shifted their gaze and all sorts of stuff, and were in fact being honest, they got it right. I can't quite remember the numbers, but I think they got it right like 23% of the time. It's just horrible. And then when it came to the Bernie Madoffs, the people who registered as the sincere liars, they got it right like 14% of the time. So this should scare the crap out of you. And anyone who works as a judge or anyone who's in a courtroom, where you start to realize that, hey, wait a minute, if these people believe that they can infer whether someone's being honest or dishonest based upon body language cues and observing their language, yeah, they're going to do quite well if someone's presenting in that believable way and they happen to be honest, or vice versa. But with the person who comes across as not believable and who's actually honest, or with the sincere liar, they're going to strike out. So this is quite scary. Why is it this way? Why is body language so unreliable? Well, first of all, the various cue theories that are based upon reading body language, a lot of it is based upon Paul Ekman's work. And what Ekman claimed is that, when the stakes are high, the liar will very often have, leakages, emotional leakages, because they're either afraid of being caught, or they might be guilty about something, or they might have duping delight, where they're kind of taking joy in getting away with something. And his idea that you could, for example, see universal expressions of fear on the face, then it would make sense that, yeah, if you can see these uh, facial expressions of fear, then you might be able to infer with a little bit of probing that the person's lying. But here's the big problem. When we step into 2024, that'll be my 27th year of seeing clients professionally, and some of the clients I've seen the most are people with phobias and people who are anxious. I've seen people like that daily for 27 years. Well, I've had some vacation days and I've had some sick days and I've had periods that were slow, but for the most part daily for 27 years. So I've studied Ekman. I've spent a lot of time learning micro expressions. I've spent a lot of time talking to people about their fears and their anxieties and watching people intensely as they go into fearful states. I spent a lot of time taking people out to sites, the local mall for people with elevator phobias, to the pet store, to heights, and watching people very carefully, watching their physiology, and also watching them when they say, oh, I feel that the fear is coming on. And yes, some of the time, people show the classical fear facial expression that Ekman proposed. And sometimes people show parts of it. For example, I'm seeing a client these days that in the first session, whenever I touched upon the context where she was afraid, you would see her neck do this, based upon the quick pulling back of the lips, which is the mouth version of a fear response. But here's what I've discovered. Most of the clients, most of the time, when they claim that the fear is coming on, do not show the fearful facial expressions that Paul Ekman claim are universal. Most of them actually don't. And there's other research to corroborate this as well with other emotions. So, for example, with surprise, that's also one of those emotions where Paul Ekman claimed that there was a universal facial expression. Yes, sometimes when people are surprised, they show that classic Ekman facial expression. But there's for example, a study from Germany where they took a bunch of people, had them walk through a hallway into a room. They listened to this Kafka recording, then they got a memory test. And afterwards, when they stepped out of the room, the people had completely changed the hallway into this room where their best friend was sat, expecting them. Now, this surprised everyone. And virtually everyone said that they were very surprised, and almost everyone suspected that pretty much anyone could read that surprise on their face. But only 7% of the people showed the surprise facial expression in full. And I think somewhere around 20% of the people had parts of it. So this shows that even with that, most of the time, people don't necessarily show the facial expressions, either full expressions or micro expressions, that we expect. And I've I've also done a lot of work with people who struggle with depression. I've seen people who've had suicidal ideation, people who have attempted suicides. Many of these people I did not spot when they came into my office. Hadn't they told me that they were suicidal or suicidally depressed, for most of them, I would not have known. They don't necessarily look any different than the person who comes in with some other issue. Yes, there are some people who claim to be depressed and they totally look the way you expect a depressed person to sound and to look. They have the slumped shoulders and they have the monotone voice tone and they have the dead face and the eyes and They hardly have the energy to move their body. Yeah, some of them present that way, but most of them don't. Some of them even come across as cheerful or happy or completely neutral. Um, I've had plenty of people who have told me that they have had panic attacks on stage in business meetings, and other people saying to them after their presentation, "I wish I could be as calm as you were up there." Meaning, people had a panic attack, and most people in the audience couldn't tell, can't really know. I'll give you a fun example of this. If you're a fan of mixed martial arts, you know about Fedor Emelianenko, who's one of the greatest fighters of all time. You know, he had this stony faced, expressionless Russian uh, demeanor. And if you watch clips of his fights, you know, even when he's punching, the face looks to be in the exact same configuration. There's this freaky clip where Kevin Randleman suplexes him and Fedor lands on his head, right? And you can see this in slow motion. And even then, you see no change in facial expression at all. So, based upon that, people tend to infer that he's just stone cold and hardly has any emotion whatsoever. But I've read interviews with Fedor, you know, one before the Tim Sylvia fight, where he said that he was extremely nervous and that he was often extremely nervous before his fights. But if you look at his demeanor, he does not at all show the facial expressions or the body language that you would expect. So in that sense, his mismatched. Um, the same, you know, and if you look at the dating market, you know, there's people often struggle with really knowing who might find them attractive or who actually likes them or not. You see a lot of these sexual harassment cases and awkward misunderstandings are based upon people completely misunderstanding and misreading someone else's internal states based upon the cues they think they see. So, for example, a lot of men will overestimate the sexual interest of a woman. You know, if any woman smiles at them or seems friendly or open, many of them will immediately infer, you know, that the woman wants to have sex with them and is into them. You know, as in she showed up in the copy room at the same time as I did. You know, of course she wants me. And a lot of women tend to underestimate the interest of many men and think, there's nothing there, you know, he's just being friendly, you know, blah, blah, blah. Now, there might be a lot of self-deception, you know, going on here too. But we tend to dramatically overestimate our abilities to so-called read other people's internal experience based upon their body language cues. And I'd suggest that you be extremely careful with it. And just know that, yes, if people register and they behave in a friendly, pleasant, straightforward, kind of symmetrical, relaxed way, they come across as believable. But how believable they come across tells you virtually nothing about whether they're actually being honest or deceiving you. There are other Q theories based upon people like aldert vrij and people like that, and they do a lot of statement analysis, and it's based upon this idea of cognitive load, that lying is cognitively more demanding than telling the truth because you kind of have to make things up and that requires more cognitive resources. And as a result of that, the person will make more errors in speech and have more thinking pauses that shouldn't be there, stuff like that. Now, I don't think this is necessarily the case either, and there's quite weak support for these sorts of theories as well. Remember that in the lab, when people do lie detection research, you have what Timothy Levine calls the bold-faced lie and the bold-faced truth. People either tell you something that's true or it's a lie. Um, in real life, it's not necessarily like that. There are more shades of gray, things are more complex. So a lot of the lies that people do, well, first of all, you have a lot of self-deception going on, right? And that kind of changes the game. And people might be mostly telling the truth, but they kind of omit a detail, which is super relevant, right? Which kind of makes it a lie in a sense. Or they might just add something to something which is mostly true that just isn't the case, but which gives a very, very different, you know, and doing these things, I don't think necessarily uh, demands any more cognitive effort at all. We use the same processes, whether we lie or tell the truth. A lot of lies are just spontaneously told in the moment, in flow. And even when people are telling the truth, they may have trouble remembering. They may not have that good access to things. So if I ask you, like what did you do, Wednesday 2 weeks ago, even if you're telling me the truth, you might have trouble remembering it. It might take quite a bit of cognitive load. Or if I were to like instruct you to lie to me and I were to tell you, ask you, what did you have for dinner last night? Or did you do last night? You you can very easily access memories of dinner and what you do in a typical night and just put that in there without that necessarily demanding any extra cognitive load at all. So, and of course, you can also plan and rehearse something if you want to tell a lie, which makes it so that it's very easy and straightforward to tell it. Um, and as a result of this, a lot of interrogators have been doing these techniques where, they get the suspect to tell the story backwards, or they try to get them to have eye contact at all times, to increase the cognitive load. But this might just very easily result in people who are telling the truth coming across as less believable just because you're increasing the cognitive load. So, do I recommend studying aldert vrij? Yeah. Do I recommend studying Ekman and learning about microexpressions and looking into body language? Yes. And especially with the very poor liars, that's where these cue theories seem to work really well. So by all means, learn those things, but take it with a grain of salt. And what does seem to work to be able to detect lies better is of course, look, if you look at human psychology, if people want to believe something, they can easily believe all sorts of stuff, right? And very often we want to be deceived. We want to believe certain things. And if we're not open to hearing certain things, we'll have all sorts of defenses to protect us from ever hearing it. Uh, and ironically, very often in close relationships or friendships, we are even worse at detecting lies because we believe. We want to believe. We have this truth default. We think we know the person, you know. But in the areas where people seem to be better at detecting lies, I mean, if you are open to the idea that you could be deceived, then you'll probably have a higher hit rate. If you can encourage people to be honest with you, if you know a lot about the topic. So, for example, If you know a lot about, let's say, real estate, and someone comes and they tell you something about their house or something they're selling that just isn't plausible, you might be in a better position to detect that lie than someone who doesn't know anything about real estate. So of course, knowing a lot on a topic, having competency and having good critical thinking skills and having access to evidence, having the opportunity to investigate, these things seem to make a difference. So I think Timothy Levine again is onto something where he says pay less attention to how people say things in their body language and pay more attention to what they're actually saying. Like pay more attention to what they're actually saying, and if it matters enough, test it. Test the information, verify it uh, after the fact. That that seems to work better. So I hope this video was intriguing to you. Again, study aldert Rye, study Paul Ekman, study Timothy Levine, look into all of this stuff. But really remember that how honest someone comes across tells you virtually nothing about how honest um, they actually are. You know. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to post them, where you find the video. If you have challenges in life, if there's changes that you'd like to make and you wonder whether you and I could be a good fit, know that I see people from all over the world online. You can get in touch with me at provocative-hypnosis.com. If you're looking for mentoring, you can also contact me. And if you're watching this in 2023, Merry Christmas. And know that I'm doing a couple of seminars on the psychological illusion model in January and February. January is a hypnotic phenomena, how to use them with clients seminar. And I'm doing the psychological illusion model seminar also in February. So check the seminar page on provocative-hypnosis.com. As always, thanks for listening.